Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the final episode of Talking Behaviour's three-part series on differential reinforcement, where I am Charlie, and with me is
James, hello.
and we are going to talk to you today about the DRI and DRL/DRH procedures, which is the differential reinforcement of incompatible behaviours and the differential reinforcement of higher and lower rates of behaviour.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. You can see a pattern here
Okay.
with the way that these are these are named, right? So they are differential reinforcement procedures, which means that they are about allocating the ratio of reinforcement so that appropriate behavior gets the reinforcement immediately occurring after it, causing it to occur more often, and minimizing or eliminating the reinforcement after inappropriate behavior, causing extinction to occur generally, or some form of differential reinforcement that gets you to do the positive behavior more and the negative behavior less. Right?
Yeah.
So, firstly, how are you, James?
Yes, all good. You?
Yeah, I'm doing good, thanks, buddy. Just grinding on. Absolutely. So let's go through those two things. So the first one of those two things that I mentioned was the differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior, right? And this was actually something that I was going to talk a little bit about in the previous one, but I kind of kept stopping myself because we were supposed to focus on the differential reinforcement of alternative and other behaviors, right? So this DRI is basically the better option that I was talking about when you've got a dangerous behavior that you want to make sure doesn't get reinforced.
Okay.
Right? And the way that this one works is you have certain things that you can't do when you're doing a type of behavior, right? For example, if your hands are engaged in something, you cannot grab someone, right? If you are sitting in a chair, you cannot kick out behind you.
I could try.
Well, yeah, you could stand up and then do it, right? But that would give you more of a break in between. Right?
Yeah.
It would give you more time to react. You cannot grab people while your hands are in your pockets, right? You cannot be holding something if you put it on the table, right? All of these are incompatible behaviors, things which could be dangerous, right? And because of this, if we differentially reinforce those incompatible behaviors to the point where they are followed 100% of the time, and then place an instruction which is incompatible when someone is doing something dangerous, we can interrupt them and stop the behavior.
Okay.
Right? So a good example of this is there are many different instructions which work well here, but the most generalized of them would be stop. Right? Teaching someone to be able to stop in activity, in transition, when about to grab something, when about to eat something, all of these very highly motivating conditions, right? By allocating reinforcement effectively, very high value reinforcement, right? You can basically teach somebody to be able to follow safety instructions. Right, these safety instructions, which will then allow somebody to be able to access environments that would have been impossible for them to access before. So in the DRO situation where you have a dangerous behavior like grabbing, right, and instead of going anytime that they don't grab people for the next 30 minutes, we're going to provide a reinforcer at the end of it. You could say, what if I reinforce every time they follow the instruction of stop? Right, and so when they reach out towards me and go to grab me and I place that stop instruction and they stop, I go, that is so much better, buddy, and give them the reaction that they're looking for, right? This is my favourite of the differential reinforcement procedures. It's a slightly later addition to the repertoire of behavioural procedures, but it's working with adults, it's like gold, right? It's what you need to be able to introduce people to environments that they're finding really difficult.
Yeah.
Stop, sit down, come here, give it to me, put it on the table. All of these.
Yeah.
Really, really, really critical, and people should be teaching them.
So useful to have that. Oh, I guess it's almost like a fail-safe, isn't it? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
For if all else fails, if that individual has the ability to follow the stop command, I guess not the correct word,
I
but
mean, instruction would be the word.
the stop prompt.
Yeah. It's an instruction.
Okay.
So you keep giving other words. I'm like, it's an instruction.
The stop instruction, then it just gives you like a safety blanket, isn't it? It gives you the ability to be able to test out more complex other alternatives and be able to still come back to it if you think you're then getting other behaviours that you don't want.
Yeah, it's definitely that. And the thing around it, though, is it's obviously not as simple as I'm putting forward, right? So people with autism specifically find it difficult to generalize skills from one setting into another setting, or from one behavior onto another, or from one person onto another person, right? And so generalization has to be kind of programmed into teaching procedures when we are doing these things. So when I say somebody has to be able to follow a stop instruction, right? to this to be a generalized safety interruption, right? For you to be able to use it as an incompatible behavior, a DRI, right? What I mean is they need to be able to respond within half a second to the first time I place the instruction with me at a certain distance, right? And they have to be able to do that consistently, whatever their level of motivation is, right? Because it will be easier for them to follow that instruction when their motivation is low versus when they are highly motivated to gain access to something, right? So to effectively get a generalized DRI or incompatible instruction, you have to generalize it. Like, you have to program generalization in for this stuff, right? You want it working across people. You want it working across settings. You want it working across motivation levels, across the behaviors that they're about to engage in. It's very important with people who generalize less that you don't assume that they will be able to do it in every circumstance. Instead, you test and you teach until they start generalizing into novel situations, and then you take those novel situations as the level that you're trying to get to. Yeah?
Yeah.
So DRI, really, really good, very, very useful. It's not enough to just say they followed stop in one context and now that is enough. It's something that needs to be continuously worked on, maintained, reinforced. And if you've got safety instructions, my recommendation is that you reinforce them on every single occurrence of them. You might intersperse them with other types of instructions to make sure that you're not reinforcing continuously and then lowering the value of your reinforcement, right? But you do want to make sure that whenever they follow stop, they get social praise and they get everything that you can possibly give them in that moment, because then when they are in that dangerous time and they're about to run and jump into a pool that's much shallower than they know that they're going to be, and you place the stop instruction, they will stop.
Yeah.
And you have time to react, right? So really like a DRI, use them a lot. Any questions on that one?
I guess obviously just in terms of touch base on making sure that other people can provide, or multiple people can provide it. I guess that's just a matter of having multiple people providing that instruction and then reinforcing the behavior still.
And taking very specific data, right? Because if you have a situation where you're teaching somebody to follow a stop instruction and you only have one line of data, i.e. it's just stop, yes, no. Did he stop on the first instruction within half a second, right? If you only have that line, you won't be able to separate out the different contexts in which the person is stopping, right? So you won't be able to tell if they are stopping in one condition versus not in another condition. It will just seem like variable data. It'll be going yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, because you don't have the specifics. You don't have enough specifics to be able to isolate, right? So in this situation, you would probably break it down into follows Charlie's stop instructions, follows James's stop instructions, follows Mum's stop instructions, which I have literally done, right? And what that ends up happening is you notice that one person completely gets it 100% of the time. You can probably isolate what things that person is doing, which are more effective than the other people. And then if they do those things, suddenly everybody's doing it, right? And that's procedural fidelity, right? If one person is doing the effective elements of a procedure, they will get the behavior, but everybody else will stop getting the behavior because they're not doing the effective elements.
Right, okay.
Yeah? So everybody has to be doing it at the right level at the same time to make sure that you move the behavior on and get that consistency. Yeah? So that's the whole thing, is you need to be tracking the dimension that you're trying to increase, right? Increasing generalizability across people means you need to track how the responses are versus different people, right? Trying to track it versus setting means you track different settings. Stop in the living room versus stop in the kitchen versus stop in the toilet, right? For example. And if you were doing it across behaviors, you could be like stops when trying to grab someone, stops when trying to hurt themselves, stops when you get the idea, right? It's just what element of generalization are you trying to measure, and how are you going to show when consistency begins to be achieved? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Perfect. Any further questions?
Not on that one, no.
No worries. So the second set of procedures that I talked about there were called the DRL and the DRH, right? Which are the differential reinforcement of lower and higher rates of behavior, right? So this happens when you have something which is occurring at an exceptionally high rate, right? And you're not going to be able to stop it, right? So instead what you have to do is you have to measure it extremely closely. And if you want to increase it, when it does increase naturally, you provide reinforcement, right? And then don't provide reinforcement when it goes back down, allowing that level to get extinguished. So then it goes up, 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 up. You can imagine the up, down on the graph, right? Kind of like a stop ticker, right?
Yeah.
Same thing for differential reinforcement of lower rates of behavior. What you have is you have a baseline level of behavior. When it goes down, you provide a reinforcer, and when it goes back up, you put that through extinction. Right, and so then every time it begins to go down, you provide the reinforcement which encourages the behavior to go down by rate. Right, and there's various prompts and different things that you can do to try and kind of encourage the lower rate of behavior. But you would do this one for things like high levels of physical stereotypy, right, flapping your hand in front of your face, right, or let's say somebody engages in a behavior, but they also have a profile thing, which means that they like physical input, right? So actually, you trying to interfere with them in doing the behavior is actually just going to provide physical input, which is highly reinforcing.
Right,
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Right. So this one is like, you wouldn't really use these on. I suppose you could use these on like self-injury if it was like occurring hundreds of times a day and you just needed to immediately like be like, okay, but you don't want to provide reinforcement after self-injury, right? Because of obvious reasons, right? Even if the lower rate is better than the higher rate, right? In that situation. But you would basically have to be tracking data really, really well. You might use this for something which is like inappropriately large number of times. Like if you ask somebody a question 1,000 times a day, right? And then somebody reinforces you for only asking for 900 times a day. You get the idea, right? It's not a blunt tool like the DRO. It's not a scalpel like the DRI. What it is it's a macro view instead of a micro view. It's going, I have no way of dealing with each individual occurrence of this thing, so I'm going to deal with the aggregated form, the total number, and I'm just going to track that because it's the only thing that I can actually affect in here. There's some stuff that it is extremely appropriate for. The questions thing, actually, that is one of my recommendations would be if you have a highly intelligent person who actually is not doing an inappropriate behavior, but the amount of times that they're doing it is inappropriate, keep track of how often that they do it, and when they do it less, provide more attention, and it will probably go down. Right? This can actually be quite appropriate for like typically developing people who are just intrusive.
Right?
Would
that not also then be almost at odds with the positive reinforcement of, then they're asking this question 1,000 times, and then when they do it 900 times, you actively reinforce it? Would that then not make them want to do that more because they're getting the reinforcement?
No,
if they have the wherewithal to notice that they've done it less, and that's why they're getting the reinforcement?
The funny thing about these procedures and the effective reinforcement is it actually doesn't matter if you know it's happening or not. It's still effective as long as the reinforcement that you've selected is effective, right? So even if you know that you're being rewarded for doing something, in fact, that improves the chances that that's going to get reinforced, right? There's some people where they might not have the cognitive capacity to track past a certain time after they've done an event and go, oh, I got this because of that, right? In that circumstance, right, reinforcement immediacy, how quickly you get it, is really important, because otherwise it could get the behavior in 10 minutes rather than the thing you're trying to get, right? But for someone who is able to retain those consequences, it's actually your behavior just allocates based on the reinforcement, and that's kind of the wonderful thing around it. Is it's more that your behavior is reacting, it's not controlling your behavior. All you're doing is controlling the reinforcement, and the behavior is controlling itself, right? It's one where it's like it is. Could you just repeat the question?
So if you've got somebody who is asking a question 1,000 times a day, and then they you then reward them when they've only asked the question 900 times a day, is it likely that an individual is going to have the cognitive abilities to differentiate and notice that you are rewarding them for doing the behavior less, as opposed to you are just rewarding them for doing the behavior?
The answer is yes across multiple occurrences, right? So again, in that immediate situation, the person might not be able to retain it or hold it, right? But if you have that situation occur multiple times, right,
across a longer period,
and the differentiation and the control of the reinforcement is correct, eventually your behavior begins to act and alter without your control.
Eventually they would realise, oh, when I do that behavior less,
they just find themselves doing it less.
They just
That's the point. It's like it's non-intrusive with this stuff. It's basically you going like, oh, actually they would probably start finding reasons to go and do it less, right? They would be like, oh, I had more time when I asked them less, so I'm going to go and ask them less because I get more time to go do this other stuff, without realizing that they got their answer every time that they asked less, and so they go and then they only have a little 10 a day, right? And then they're always getting the answer, and that's self-maintaining. But when they go back up to 500, the person's just like, I'm just not dealing with this anymore. And then they're like, oh, okay, maybe that was what was happening.
Yeah.
So maybe on that spontaneous reoccurrence after extinction, sure, they might go back
Yeah.
and be like, oh, I've actually isolated it. But you'd have to be very socially aware and self-aware, right, to be able to pick that out, right? And I would say that, funnily enough, high-functioning people with autism, which I guess is not necessarily the right term anymore. I guess it would be typically developing facing people with autism, people who will pass as typically developing. I would say that they will pick up on this stuff quite a lot, right? In fact, we can be a bit more socially aware and self-aware, but that's compensatory, right? It's a compensatory mechanism that has developed because we were quite bad at it when we were younger. And because of that, we've developed very logical systems for reading empathetic behavior, right? And so you look at the world as input-output and you go, oh, I get it. Every time that I asked them 20 times a day, they were getting annoyed, and that was what was stopping me from doing it. And I have to break it down that much to be able to go, oh, I see, I should just message them less. Whereas other people would be like, okay, they're not responding, I should probably message them less. I have to work out why. It's very, but it does go to show you that behavior, it helps to know why it's happening, right? But it's not a requirement.
Yeah.
And in fact, there are many things happening in your environment which will be controlling elements of your behavior which you have no understanding of, but they're going to be affecting your behavior either way. And that's just all of us, mate.
Yeah.
Any questions?
No, not on that one.
I think that was quite thorough, to be honest. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening, and we will see you for the next set.